Disclaimer, content in this video has been created strictly for educational and investigational purposes. There is no intention to glamorise or endorse criminality or any aspect of crime. The information in this video has been acquired online from publicly available sources. It's the 1860s, and the site where HMP Addiewell now sits, in the wee village of Addiewell, West Lothian, is a steaming industrial shithole. Back then, it's the Addiewell Chemical Works, churning out paraffin oil for lamps and making a right mess of the countryside. For near enough a century, this place is all about oily sludge and hard graft, employing people from Glasgow to Edinburgh, until it shut shop in 1956. The site's left a bit of a wasteland, with nobody gained at a second glance for decades. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and the SPS is dealing with a dated prison system, overcrowding, manky cells, and an environment that's a cross between porridge and train spotting. They need a new nick, and this old chemical works site smack bang between Glasgow and Edinburgh is the perfect spot. But why? The long and short of it is, right, it's got decent transport links, it's no too close to posh people at Moan, and it's big enough for a proper fortress. In January 2004, a 6-week public consultation kicks off, and by June 2006, contracts handed to a consortium led by Sodexo Justice Services, backed by Royal Bank Project Investments, for a £75 to £80 million private finance initiative deal, known as a PFI. A PFI is basically when the government doesn't want to pay for something up front, so they'll get a private company to build and manage it, and then the government rents it off them for years. Sounds dodgier than your granny's kneecaps. And it was. They were popular back in the 90s and early 2000s, but it got a lot of stick for its long-term cost to taxpayers and quality issues, leading to them being phased out. The plan for this PFI was to build a shiny learning prison for 700 adult male cons, convicted, remand and protection, with 96 extra spots in reserve. It was meant to be a game changer. On the 12th of December 2008, Addiewell opens its doors, ready to school its inmates and send them back to society as model citizens. But that didn't go quite to plan. The build itself is quite modern, right? There was no Victorian dungeon stuff here. Designed by HLM architects, Addiewell laid out with 2 massive 4-storey T-shaped house blocks, each with 3 spurs, which are basically halls spinning off them, linked by a central hub. They had 12 wings for single and double cells, plus special ones for disabled cons, separating remand, convicted and first offenders, long-termers and protection cases. There's even a separation and care unit for the real troublemakers, and a fancy L-shaped central building with a link centre for rehab programmes. The education and training block is packed right in the middle, and it's surrounded by a landscape courtyard, because the big idea that 40 hours a week of purposeful activity, learning skills, tackling bad habits, and cutting reoffending. Loads of natural light, bright colours, and extra classrooms in the house blocks made it feel less like a jail and more like a community college, apart from the bars and the razor wire, of course. The entry building handled visits, admin, and the governor's suite, all streamlined for efficiency. Sodexo's going on about their peer support model, where cons act as mentors, helping run classes and sports. On the face of it, it sounds like a revolutionary approach to the prison system. But underneath the facade was a different story. Barely 2 months after HMP Addiewell opened its gates in December 12, 2008, trouble erupted. On February 8, 2009, 35 cons built barricades with pool tables, smashed furniture and even flat screen tellies. They got tooled up with pool cues, broom handles and sulks filled with pool balls, and turned the hall into a war zone. One con called Paul Jackson sent his cell alight, piling up pillow slips and toilet paper in a bonfire. The carnage lasted 3 hours, and it was one female screw that decided to lock the wing down to keep it from spreading. It worked. Livingston Sheriff Court later extended her jail time. Jackson got 3 years and 1 month for fire raising and breach of the peace, whilst Matthew Wilson and Kevin Kelly got 2 years and 4 months for breach of the peace. Sheriff Douglas Kinlock said the court must deter others for this behaviour. But did it? Surely at this point, yous are probably wide dramatic pauses. 8 months later, in October 2009, another disturbance rocked Addiewell. Around 20 cons kicked off, although details on what sparked it are quite thin. What we do know is, right, It was bad enough to send a screw to the hospital. The jail was still kind of finding its feet. It was already at capacity with 700 cons. Your low, medium and high security plus remand cases. Reports hinted at overcrowding and staffing issues as the route, but the SPS kept quiet in specifics. The incident reported by Wikipedia was a red flag that Addiewell's modern setup wasn't enough to keep the peace. But this was nowhere near as bad as one of the worst standoffs. On January 25th, 2010, Addiewell faced its biggest test to date. Up to 70 cons, some reports saying 100, barricaded themselves in Douglas B and C wings, kicking off a 5-hour standoff. 2 screws got injured, and the media, including the Scotsman, jumped on it, calling it a riot that exposed the jail's struggles. The cons caused an absolute commotion that needed Calyx staff, which is Sodexo's brand at the time, to step in with control and restraint tactics. David Melrose for the Prisoner Officers Association blamed low staff levels in private jails, while Clive Fairweather, former Chief Inspector of Prisons, pointed to profit-driven corner cutting as the culprit. Fewer staff, low wages, less training, they said, hinting that this creates more problems. But was this the worst Addiewell would get? Fast forward to March 2017, and Addiewell's back in the headlines for a brutal episode. 2 convicted murderers, William Lewis and Paul Deeney, went on a violent spree in the residential wing. Lewis was a triple murderer, branded evil, violent and highly dangerous by a judge, stabbed inmate Stuart Campbell twice in the face with a metal spike. Both Lewis and Deeney threatened screws with blades and sharpened spikes running an absolute mock. At Livingston Sheriff Court, Lewis got an extra 3 years, whilst Deeney, already serving a 20-year term, got an R18 month. The Crown dropped other charges, including alleged attacks on other cons. But the incident showed how dangerous Addiewell could be. That same year, Addiewell hit a new high. This time it was a legal one. There 3 days in August 2017, 9 screws were rushed to hospital after inhaling spice, which was a synthetic drug cons were smoking like it was going out of fashion. The Daily Record was the first to break the story, describing screws collapsing or feeling ill after inhaling the toxic smoke, wafting through the wings. Cons were using spice openly, and the jail's ventilation system was no match. Sodexo called it a serious incident, but kept stewing details. By 2017, Addiewell had one of Scotland's worst drug records, with 206 suspected fines in its first year. It was in January 2018, where something as simple as snow lit the fuse for an R riot, and a Tuesday night, heavy snowfall hit central Scotland, known as the Beast for the East. And don't get this confused with the top man of Peterhead, no. Prison bosses decided to lock down early 8 PM instead of the usual 10 PM, so the screws could go up the road. The cons, 28 of them, were having none of it. They rioted, smashing furniture and a pool table, and it took riot shields to bring them under control after 11 PM. Sodexo called it a peaceful protest, but the damage and disruption tell a different story. Some cons were transferred to our jails, and the incident raised eyebrows about staffing. By July 2019, Addiewell's reputation was taking an R hit. A routine medical check in the wing turned into a nightmare when a prisoner, most likely it was Carol Cox, went bananas. He grabbed a metal floor sweep and swung it like, quote unquote, a samurai sword, according to an insider. Nurses screamed and took cover, some dropped to the floor like hedgehogs apparently, to avoid the rampage. Screws and riot gear bounced in and disarmed the prisoner after a 10-minute standoff. Nobody was really hurt, but the fear was real. The incident, reported by the Scottish Sun, highlighted the dangers of managing inmates with substance issues in a jail already stretched thin. Then came March 23rd, 2020, when the world was balls deep into the coronavirus pandemic. At Addiewell, tensions boiled air. Up to 10 cons in 4D Hall rioted, shock, starting fires and vandalising the wing. A video popped up showing one con holding a Screws ID card and another one waving a metal rod when asked, "Where's your cosh?" 2 screws got injured and emergency services, including 5 fire engines, turned up. The cons had to put out the fire themselves before the fire service arrived, but the damage was done. The SPS reported the culprits to the police, and the jail was secured, but fears of a hostage situation lingered. The Daily Record noted the riot was fueled by anger over inmates with symptoms not being isolated. In 2021, Addiewell's reputation took another battering. A video popped up splashed across Edinburgh Live, showing a female screw getting far too cosy with a con, full-on winching in a cell. Police get involved, and unsurprisingly the lassie's employment got terminated. Imagine that. You get to jail for nipping somebody. But that same year, a 34-year-old con named Callum English contracted COVID. You see, Callum had asthma and respiratory issues. But what part did Addiewell play in this? That part was negligence. See, over the space of 12 days, right, Callum's condition got worse. He was breathing heavy, chest was agony, he was even coughing up blood. He used the buzzers, air and air again, begging to see a nurse. The screws repeatedly told him that he'd be seen in the morning. But did anybody ever turn up? No, nobody came. On the 24th of October, the screws opened his cell door and found him dead, alone and abandoned. His dad, Alan English, said it was barbaric. And you know what? He's spot on, but here's where it gets heavy, right? After years of pushing, shouting and grief, in April 2025, the Lord Advocate finally stepped in, and both the Crown slaps charges in both HMP Addiewell and NHS Lothian. That's right, Scotland's first ever criminal prosecution to a private jail after a death in custody. It's not just a tragedy, it's a stain in the whole system. A man died asking for help that never came. No questions have been asked. Big ones. But Callum English was just one of the few victims to the confines of Addiewell. Another was Jordan Burns. Jordan Burns was only 22, a young boy who was stuck in remand in HMP Addiewell, waiting to face assault charges. Instead of a court date, he got a coffin. His ma Janice said it straight. Addiewell sentenced my son to death. And once you hear what happened, you'll see she's not been dramatic. See, Jordan was screaming for help in every way possible. He tried jumping off balconies, OD'd multiple times, even set fire to his own cell. At one point, he sliced open his own throat and then phoned his lawyer whilst he was bleeding, telling him he was done waiting for the mental health support that never came. And still, no support, no meds, no care. The prison knew he had PTSD and ADHD. They knew he tried to take his life before, but when he died on the 10th of November 2023 for a drug overdose in his cell, he wasn't even on suicide watch. They literally stopped checking on a suicidal boy who already tried to end it multiple times. His ma says she never even got a proper phone call. Prison screws turned up at her door, stayed 15 minutes, and then left her with nothing but questions. They even gave her the wrong details for the morgue. She had to hunt her own boy down just to say goodbye. And we're the criminals. You telling me that's care? Addiewell's ran by Sodexo, a private firm making millions. And when they're not meeting their performance indicators, they just pay a fine, then hand 1.5 million in dividends to shareholders. Meanwhile, young men like Jordan are dying behind the bars. Since Jordan's death, there's been 14 more deaths in Addiewell. 14. His family's now suing the jail. And they should. But let's be honest, when it's a private jail that's funded by tax but run like a business, justice is near impossible. Amir Anwar says it best. The prison effectively sanctioned a death sentence, and for that, they should face prosecution. And let's not forget, this isn't just a one-off. In 2023, 64 people died in Scottish jails. The average age was just 49. Mental health services are graded at a D by international rights monitors. There's no help in there, just punishment. And whilst the SBS hides behind the phrase natural causes, we've got research telling us that suicides are on the rise and support is either non-existent or it comes too late. Professor Sarah Armstrong said it clearly. In every suicide case in 2024, people were asking for help, but didn't get it. So tell me this, who's really got blood in their hands? The big incidents grab headlines, but Addiewell's had a constant pulse of violence. In 2022, the Ferret reported 166 assaults with prisoners, including attacks with razor blades and boiling water. 44 of these were on staff, and 29 were deemed serious, more than any other Scottish prison. The jail holding 701 cons was outpacing even Berlinian serious assaults. But here's the kicker, right? There was insiders claiming incidents were dramatically underreported due to fear of a backlash and poor management. Complaints were going missing, and a culture of violence, fear and intimidation was said to be rampant. So does this mean that the staff in Addiewell were just as guilty of violence as the cons? In 2023, an inspection by HM Inspectorate of Prisons for Scotland shook things up. 40% of inmates, near enough half, said they'd been abused, threatened, bullied or assaulted by staff. 60% claimed they'd seen it happen to others. Chief Inspector Wendy Sinclair Gibbon called it the worst findings in a 5-year. The report pointed to chronic staff shortages and inexperienced officers as culprits, with relationships between staff and cons at rock bottom. The ferret followed up, alleging the situation was even worse, with covering up of violent incidents and complaints even vanishing. But it seemed in some cases it was tit for tat between the screws and the cons. In that same year, 6 screws motors were firebombed in the jail's own car park. A deliberate, coordinated attack. No accident, no coincidence. We're talking petrol bombs here. Now let's not beat about the bush. It was clearly a message, whether it was a warning for inside the jail or an outside mob sending a signal. Things were clear. Somebody wanted the screws to feel vulnerable, even outside there was. According to the Herald, this was the latest in a series of violent incidents that plagued Addiewell, a prison already accused of being overstretched, under-supervised and riddled with chaos. So when the very people that are meant to keep order are scared to park their motors at work, you have to ask yourself, who's really running the show in Addiewell? Addiewell's history of violence, riots, assaults and even deaths paint a troubled picture. The jail's modern setup, with its learning prison promise, has been overshadowed by overcrowding, staff shortages and allegations of gang control. Whistleblowers in 2021 claimed gangs were running the show, with guards turning a blind eye to illegal activities. By 2023, the jail reserve capacity 103%, making rehabilitation and safety even harder, according to MSP Liam MacArthur. Sodexo insists in investing in staff training and safety, but critics, including the Scottish Government, question whether private prisons can deliver. The old Justice Secretary Kenny McCaskill once said prisons are for public safety and not private profit. Yet Addiewell's contract runs to 2034, another 9 years to either break its cycle of violence or draw more blood in its violent, chaotic history. So there you have it. The raw, unfiltered history of violence, via a CD player spark in 2009 to a deadly assault in 2024. This jail's been a battleground of riots, stabbings and fear. And a wee smoochy, no. So there you have it, troops. For the old days of public floggings and bridewells, to the cold grey slabs of Berlin and Peterhead, to the private sector play part that is Addiewell, we've taken a guided tour through Scotland's system of state-sanctioned silence. We've heard about the cages that started it all. We've walked through riots, hostage-taking, murder, scandal, brutality, and mere lockdowns in a COVID calendar. We've named the jails, we've named the deeds, and named the shamed. We've seen men tortured and dragged like animals, families broken, and justice buried under corporate immunity and bureaucratic shite. We've clocked the prisons that claim to rehabilitate, but can't even give out hot water or mental health meds. Every prison we've covered, Saughton, Pullman, Glenorchy, Low Moss, Shotts, Addiewell, tells you the same thing in a different accent. The system isn't built to heal, it's built to contain, to forget and punish. And aye, some people probably do deserve to be behind bars. Nobody's saying any different. When jails are bursting at the seams, people are sleeping in mattresses and flares, and the screws are running on caffeine and trauma, you need to ask yourself, right, is this justice or organised cruelty? We're in 2025 and yet we're still dealing with 18th century ideas in 21st century buildings. Overcrowding, understaffing, a revolving door for the broken and abandoned. No strategy, no vision, just reaction. And whilst politicians fight their figures and fob you off with policy soundbites, there's young boys hanging themselves and grieving maws, burying wains that the system forgot. Scotland's prison system isn't just cracked, it's bleeding. But here's the thing, this podcast, this was only the start. The past is mapped, the stories are told, but the future is still unwritten. They can lock the locks, but they can't stop the clocks. I'm Hawaii 5-0, and this is Patsy Crime. Like, subscribe, and don't get wide. Catchy!